Welcome everyone to Overcoming Codependency, how to get your needs met in relationships. And I added how to be true to yourself to the title as well when I was thinking about this workshop. Thank you for being here. And yeah, those of you watching on recording, thank you for signing up as well. Just so you know, those of you just joined, we've been typing in the chat situations in our lives in which codependency might be at play right now. And we've talked about dating, work relationships, struggling to express our needs and wants, showing up authentically, taking on other people's feelings, caring for parents. So this shows up in all areas of our lives. So I am going to now share my screen. So just very briefly about me. Many of you know me well. Those of you who don't, I am a coach, a speaker, and an author, and I am also on my own healing journey from many different dysfunctional behaviors, including codependency. And over the last 20 odd years, I have completely transformed. So I have a few pictures of transformation here. So what I do now is I'm a trauma-informed transformational coach and a midlife mentor, supporting people in relationships and in midlife transitions. I am a wellbeing and mental health speaker and consultant. I'm the author of How to Fall in Love, which many of you have read. I put aspiring novelist, but I've changed that to novelist because I have actually finished my novel more or less, and I thought, let's just call myself a novelist. It's nearly there. I host courses under the How to Fall in Love banner, and I host retreats, and I'm married to Bill, which was one of the miracles of my recovery journey. This is what I would like to cover today. And you can let me know at the end if I've covered these topics. I'd love to increase or deepen your understanding of how codependency can sabotage your relationships and erode your well-being. I'd like to offer a 3-step strategy to transform your codependent relationships into healthy ones, interdependent ones. I'd like to offer some communication tools and techniques so that you can speak your truth despite your fear. So I'm not going to say without fear. I'm going to say despite your fear, even with your fear, because I've been recovering from codependency for decades and I'm still terrified when I have to speak my truth. But the key is that we do it and we find ways to do it. Some stress management tips to deal with the anxiety that comes up from doing these behaviors and the backlash that might come up. A self-worth action plan to build your self-esteem. Many of you are on that journey already. I hope that you will feel empowered and confident to show up authentically after this workshop. So what is codependency and how does it show up in your life? So this is, if you haven't yet popped anything in the chat and you'd like to, just note down how you think codependency shows up in your life. Please do that now. You'll see in the chat there are some examples that people have given: boundaries at work, dating, feeling insecure when dating, people pleasing, wanting to be liked too much, poor boundaries, dealing with elderly parents who have, perhaps they put their needs on us and we don't know how to manage those boundaries. So if you'd like to put anything else about how it shows up in your life, please do. And there is a question of, is mistrust part of codependency? I would say yes. Off the top of my head, in that it comes, I think mistrust comes from a place of our own insecurity, unless we have very good grounds to not trust somebody. So if there are red flags and alarm bells, then we want to listen to our intuition and trust ourselves. But if we don't trust somebody, even though they are trustworthy, that likely comes from our past. It's rooted in our early life experiences, and that's something we might want to heal. Yeah, not being able to identify what I want, life goals and dreams, and getting swayed by other people's views. Being assertive with my needs, not undermining how important something is to me before it's too late, and not making too many sacrifices or compromises. So thank you for those examples, and you're welcome to keep popping them in the chat. And I do encourage you to use the chat because it builds connection. It builds a sense of not being alone with these struggles. We inspire each other and we empower each other. I really like these images. So this is the false self. We show up as a chameleon, we show up as a doormat, or we show up as a pretzel. So, the chameleon, we metaphorically change our skin color or our external appearance or how we show up on the outside to suit our surroundings. We try and fit in, we try and belong, we try not to rock the boat. If you want me to be green, I'll be green. In my case, when I was dating, if you're smoking weed, I'll smoke weed, even though I don't like smoking weed. It doesn't suit me, but I'll do it anyway. So I will change my color and my behavior to fit with you. The doormat is a classic codependent trait. We subordinate our needs and wants, and we lie down, and at the extreme, we say, walk all over me. I'm not worth anything. Your needs are more important than mine. The pretzel, we bend ourselves into strange shapes in order to fit in, to be acceptable, to be lovable, what we think is acceptable and what is lovable. So we do some mind reading. Like we think, okay, what is an acceptable way to show up in this situation? And then we change ourselves into that shape. Some behaviors that we've already talked about: excessive compromise, self-sacrifice, subordination. And the key is the question, at what cost? So, and we'll be talking about the cost. What is the cost to us when we show up as a chameleon, as a doormat, or as a pretzel? Just think about those. They're quite distinctive images. So think about those when you're interacting with other people. Boundaries, there's a comment about boundaries, perhaps overgiving or giving more than perhaps I've got in the tank. Yeah, giving from an empty tank. Too nice in relationships. Yeah. So that's an umbrella. Codependency is an umbrella term. It covers a multitude of behaviors. And I like to sort of drill it down to fear, low self-esteem, and insecurity. And I've also added poor sense of self and weak boundaries. So, for example, someone mentioned not knowing what my goals or life dreams are. That comes from a poor sense of self. It also comes from fear. It comes from low self-esteem, not believing that I'm worth it or valuable. We've talked about weak boundaries. So for me, codependency is an umbrella term, and it covers a lot of different behaviors. Here are some statements that I think are really helpful, that have really helped me. So codependents are addicted to safety at all costs. I need to stay safe, and I'll do anything to stay safe. And you might not think, and I'll come on to this in a moment, you might not think that your mind is thinking about safety when you're doing these behaviors, but often at the root, that's what it's about. So addicted to safety at all costs, we feel compelled to act against our best interests in relationships. So there might be two choices in relationships. One is, I'm going to act in my best interests. I'm going to be real. I'm going to be true. I'm going to be authentic. I'm going to do this thing because it's good for me. And then there's the other choice, which is against my best interests. And codependents often consistently act against our best interests. We derive our self-esteem and our self-worth from outside sources. So we lack a true sense of I am enough, I am acceptable, I am perfectly imperfect. And we look to bosses, colleagues, partners, qualifications, degrees, jobs, status, roles, parents, etc. We look to those people to give us self-esteem, which leaves us with behaviors such as, bending over backwards to please people, over-delivering, overdoing, ending up exhausted, and so forth. We feel compelled to put people at ease. So this is the doormat. And it is a form of control, because if I'm a doormat, if I don't stand up for myself, I'm going to try and control how you behave towards me. I'm going to try and prevent you from being angry towards me or upset with me, or I'm going to try and stop you from leaving me or rejecting me or abandoning me. So it is a form of control. So we feel compelled to put people at ease. And then there's another side of the coin, which I think is really important for some of us to notice, because I definitely had this as well. So I had both. We feel compelled to put people at dis-ease. Now, that isn't a nice characteristic. We often think about codependents as people who are too nice. We're too nice, we're too kind, we're too giving. But we can also feel compelled to put people at dis-ease. And that is, again, a form of control and manipulation. And it comes from a place of low self-esteem and fear and insecurity. And where that showed up for me is in my relationship, and especially in the early stages, but it can still show up where I can judge and criticize and undermine and disrespect. Sounds awful, doesn't it? I am a pretty nice person mostly, but because of my fear and low self-esteem, my fear of intimacy, and my need to control everything, I can try and keep my partner at a distance sometimes, and I can put him down. I do that very rarely now, because I have learned, but it is something to be aware of and to look out for. And I'll just mention what's in the chat. I wonder if codependency is also attaching identity to how others perceive us, and how they feel. So that's a bit similar to the way in which we derive our self-esteem and self-worth from outside sources. So we're overly concerned with what other people think about us. And we also make up in our head what we think other people think about us. So we do a lot of mind reading and imagining. So the consequences of codependent traits, and I'm just starting with romantic relationships here. So dating, for example, we don't ask the questions that we want to ask, because we're afraid of rejection, we're afraid of abandonment, we're afraid that this isn't going to work out if I ask the question that is on the tip of my tongue. We don't listen to our intuition, so we ignore our intuition, which obviously leads us into unhealthy relationships. We rationalize poor behavior. So somebody might say something disrespectful to us, or might not show up for a date, or might talk about sex far too soon, and we might feel icky about this. We don't like it, but we'll rationalize. Oh, they were tired, or oh, it's just the first date, let's give them a chance. Now, you know that I'm all in favor of not judging people and not ruling them out. But the other side of that is we totally ignore the red flags and we rationalize poor behavior. So I work on this with many of my clients, this tendency to make ourselves wrong and make the other person right. So there must be something wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with them. There must be something wrong with me. And this comes from our childhoods often, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Struggling to set or hold boundaries. So, we struggle to set boundaries with people. We struggle to separate from them. And this image is, from Dirty Dancing, this is my dance space, this is your dance space. So I keep my dance space here, and I decide who comes into my dance space. I decide where the boundary is. I decide the kind of language that I allow to come into my space. I decide whether you touch me or not. These are boundaries. And when we have poor boundaries, we have porous boundaries, and we allow in disrespect, we allow in poor language, we allow in bad behavior that isn't good for us. So this shows up in dating, it shows up in romantic relationships, and not just in romantic relationships, in all relationships. We hide our truth. We compromise our needs and wants at great cost to ourselves. We people please. We subordinate our needs, and we show up as a different person. We show up as the person we think the other person wants us to be. And this leads to relationships that are false. They're not based on our true self. And just the other point that I mentioned earlier, we also control, or we judge, or we criticize, or we undermine, or we push the other person away. So that's the other side of the coin. So I just want you to think, and perhaps if you'd like to pop it in the chat, whether you can relate to any of those behaviors in personal relationships, perhaps dating, romantic relationships, people pleasing, subordinating your needs. So have a think about that. You can do a little note about it in your journal, or you can pop it in the chat. Okay, if anything comes in, I'll take note of it. Yeah, making me wrong and making them right. So this is really important to register, especially if that hits you hard. And I know some of my clients who I coach one-to-one struggle with this. So making myself wrong and making others right. And this comes from our early life, when we had to believe that our parents were right because they were in charge of our very survival. So we have to believe that they're right, even if they're doing crazy things. And that means that someone has to be wrong in this relationship. So I have to be wrong. So we make ourselves wrong. I tend to fawn around men. Fear sometimes drives me to undermine or avoid my honesty, especially if there's a lot counting on it. So I hear the awareness, and it's really important to remember that the only successful relationship is successful in terms of healthy and fulfilling is the authentic one. Sooner or later, the truth will come out about who we are, what we think, what we want, because it might take a long time and we might suffer a lot in the process of not being true to ourselves. But eventually, the truth will out. And then if we have built a relationship on truth, then that relationship will stay. And it will withstand the wobbles and the difficult conversations and the negotiations if we have two emotionally intelligent, emotionally open people. Otherwise, the relationship is built on a false self or two false selves, and that can't last. Don't have the vocabulary to put down boundaries and can't cope with the discomfort of telling the truth. Thank you for that. Yeah, people will be familiar with that, and I'm coming on to that. Recognize the control aspect, particularly when they've had the upper hand as they have children and I don't. Yeah, I hear perhaps just the way you've written it, but in your mind, they have the upper hand, or in your interpretation of how the world is. Am I right in that? Because they are your equals. They are your equals. I can be controlling, struggle to express my needs, trust others. Yeah, so go over the top. Work, family, friends, find it difficult to express my needs. Thank you for those comments, and please keep commenting. So a note on our work relationships. So if we are operating from a place of fear, low self-esteem, I'm not enough, then we will over-deliver and we will burn out, which is my experience. I've had that experience. What we're aiming for is relationship freedom, where we interact freely as our true selves, where we speak our truth, where we show up honestly, where we aren't afraid to be our authentic selves. And I'm sure you can all imagine and sense, perhaps you can just close your eyes for a moment and just feel what that would be like to feel free of the shackles of needing to be someone who you're not or needing to please. How would that feel? Because that's what we're aiming for. And of course, it's not going to be perfect and it's not going to feel like that all the time. But it does kind of lift a weight off our shoulders if we're able to manage our relationships more freely and with more honesty. It's just a comment in the chat. Just had a light bulb moment in that I allow my 23-year-old to disrespect me at the cost of not wanting to tell anyone. I have brought up a disrespectful son as I feel guilty. Also, I don't want to fall out with him, but we have no relationship now, so it can't get worse. Yeah. Yeah, that, holding your boundaries with adult children can be as hard as holding boundaries with parents or small children, but it sounds like you understand that the cost is too high. The cost is too high. So we want to move from codependent to interdependent. So interdependent relationships are balanced, they are healthy, they are based on authenticity. And I'd like to suggest that we follow these steps: awareness, acceptance, and action. So what we're doing now is we're raising our awareness. And I just want to deepen this a little bit. So why am I codependent? Many of you will know this. Often we grew up in dysfunctional family systems, codependent family systems. Perhaps there was a model of codependency that was passed down to us, a model of, and I definitely inherited this from my dear mum, a poor sense of self, weak boundaries, low self-esteem, fear of the world, fear of people, subordination, doormat. So perhaps this was passed down to you. You might have seen it in your parents. It might have been passed down to you. It might be a template that was imposed on you. You might have had traumatic or challenging early life experiences, and some people identify with the word trauma, some people don't, and that's fine. Think of challenging early life experiences. But trauma applies to situations in which, as children, our needs weren't met, our emotional needs weren't met, our needs for love and safety and security. If those needs weren't met, then it is traumatic to the child. So we had unmet childhood needs for safety, security, love, validation. So for many of us, codependency has deep roots, and it's not our fault, and it's nothing to be ashamed of or to feel guilty about. And actually, most of the world, most people on our planet are to some degree codependent. The question is, how much is it costing me? How much is it harming me? I think it's really important to understand what was going on because many of us think, oh, it wasn't that bad. My childhood wasn't that bad. Other people had it worse. But the young child, the human infant instinctively knows that without proper care, without proper love, without a sense of safety, without being seen, without being soothed, the child instinctively knows that without their needs getting met, they will die. And it's very hard to remember that because we were very young, but we instinctively know that. That is, psychology, psychotherapy will tell you that we know that. We know that we won't survive unless we are cared for. We know that from our instinct. So if our needs aren't being met, we are very intelligent beings and we are going to find a way to survive. We are wired for survival. So I am going to think, as young as I can possibly think, what do I need to do around here to be loved? And therefore to survive? Who do I need to be liked? And therefore to survive? How do I need to behave to be acceptable and lovable and therefore survive? So just have a think about whether that resonates with you. For some of you who might have worked with me before, who might have done therapy before with other people, it might be something that you're aware of. But it took me a long time on my journey to really understand that my survival was threatened and I learned survival tools. And even though I'm 53, and even though I was in my 40s or in my 30s, even though I was an adult, clearly surviving, those survival coping mechanisms were deeply rooted and ingrained in my behaviors. They had become habits. So even as an adult, I'm thinking, what do I need to do to be loved? What do I need to do to feel safe? How can I survive this situation? So this is why it's so hard. I mean, some of you have mentioned in the chat that it's terrifying to speak your truth, that it's frightening to speak up, to rock the boat. And it's not just because we're scared, it's because our early life experience taught us that our survival was threatened and we needed to find some survival tools. And many of us found survival tools around being good, being nice, being very giving, or being very controlling in some way. So I picked up numerous survival tools, and control shows up in many different ways. And many of you, I won't spend long on this because many of you know my story, but control for me wasn't just about, well, it was about how you saw me. So if you saw me in a certain way, as in thin and perfect, beautiful, then I would be safe. And that goes right back to my dad. So if my dad thinks I am beautiful and wonderful, then maybe he'll stay, maybe I'll be safe. So I tried to get really thin to control the people around me. Control usually backfires. So for me, it backfired into binge eating. And binge eating, binge drinking, numbing behaviors are a form of codependency because we are in denial. So denial is a form of codependency. So we're in denial about our true feelings. We're in denial about our pain. We're in denial about what's really going on for us. So just have a think about whether you have exercised control or whether you have been in denial about your feelings in some way in your life, whether you have numbed, and feel free to share that. And be mindful that that is a form of codependency, denial. So this is familiar to, because we've mentioned this in the chat, the compliance I'll be a good girl. There's also obviously the opposite of that, which is I'll be a rebel. I mean, the rebel is also looking for attention. The rebel is also trying to control how other people see them. I rebelled secretly when my mom wasn't watching. When people were watching, I was a good girl. I was a good girl. I was a high achiever. Yeah, so I know many of the people I work with understand and relate to the good girl trait, perhaps in your work. Perhaps you stay too late, you work too hard, you give too much. And this is compliance. It's sort of bending ourselves or being someone who we think the other person wants us to be so that we're more acceptable, more lovable, and ultimately safe. So someone relates to the numbing and denial, never thought of them as codependent traits. Yeah. We talked about awareness, and we could keep raising. I mean, we obviously want to keep raising our awareness. We want to spot codependency, know what it is, know where it comes from. We also want to practice acceptance. So self-love, self-compassion, self-validation, self-parenting. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, the self-parenting. Many of you are familiar with that. So what we don't want to do is make the situation worse by beating ourselves up and feeling shameful or guilty for getting it wrong, making a mistake, not speaking up. You know, how many times have we berated ourselves for missing an opportunity to speak our truth, or for going numb and going silent when we had an opportunity to speak up? That's not helpful. Like, because we're already down, and then we're just bashing ourselves on the head and pushing ourselves down again. So we want acceptance. We deserve acceptance. We deserve to give ourselves all of the things that we weren't given as children. Yeah, someone says they can relate to the numbing and denial and swinging from rebel to good girl. Is fear of being seen also codependency? Yeah. Yes, I think so. Because again, it's kind of controlling, isn't it? It's controlling what comes into our world. So if we are seen, then we are vulnerable to, well, we are open to praise, but we're also vulnerable to criticism and attack. Perhaps if our experiences as children were that we were bullied or criticized or hurt, then we'll want to stay small and shrink and not be seen. So yes, that is why I took out aspiring novelist and changed it to novelist, even though that might be slightly pushing it because I'm not there yet, not quite there yet. But, you know, I've written 300 pages, so that's a book. So yeah, fear of being seen, I'd say it's also codependency. So I'm going to talk, just before I talk about action, in case you're feeling a bit down about your codependent traits, I want to remind you of the upside, because when we're codependent, we also have a superpower. We have great empathy. We have a strong intuition if we dare to trust it. We see things that others miss. We're often very creative. And if I think about the work I do in my coaching, you know, I believe that I am a good coach because I'm very empathetic and I can see through. I see through people, I see through their words, and I understand what's going on inside. So if you think about a child growing up in an alcoholic home or in a violent home or in a dangerous situation, or in a situation where our needs aren't met, we're going to be hyper vigilant. We're going to be reading the room. We're going to be looking for signs. We're going to be trying to figure out how to be safe. And those experiences, although they're not pleasant, they develop these incredible, intuitive, people reading skills. And I'd like you to celebrate your really good qualities, because it can be hard to see ourselves as codependent. So the key is to believe that there are these superpowers, and that you do have a strong intuition. So many of the women I work with have a strong intuition but struggle to trust it because we are codependent, because we were perhaps told in our early life that that whatever intuitive thought we had, if we spoke it out loud, we were told we were wrong. For example, if I point out the crazy situation in my childhood home, or if I mention the alcoholism, or if I mention something that's happening and I am told that I am wrong, that that's not happening, that I've seen it wrong, yeah, then I'm not going to trust my intuition. So then we have to repair that. We have to repair that. Let's just see. My mum encouraged us to be good girls. When we wanted to ask our dad for something quite reasonable, like help with something, we had to appease him, like make him a drink and a nice snack. Yeah. So you had reasonable needs and wants that you wanted to communicate, but the only way, well, you were taught to communicate by people pleasing, appeasing is a good word, keeping the peace. Someone shares about the confusing thing about wanting to be seen and also not wanting to be seen. So I want to be seen, but I'm afraid of being seen. And that's similar to I want to be in a relationship, but I'm afraid of being in a relationship. And that's how we get the push-pull with love, with relationship, and we get the push-pull with success. I want to be successful, but I'm afraid of being successful. I have that. I know some of you have that too. I love this picture. I just thought she looked so cool. Love her hair. Yeah, I'm going to talk about action. So we've talked about awareness and acceptance, and I want to talk about action. And, you know, the actions that we take, and I appreciate that all these are difficult, so I'm going to talk about why they're difficult and how to take them. But we want to stand tall, hold our shape, speak up, rock the boat where required, express our needs and wants without appeasing, without guilt, without shame, without apology. Gosh, how many of us apologize all the time when we've got nothing to apologize for? We say no when we mean no, yes when we mean yes, and we face our fears. So these are the actions that we want to take. So how do we take them if we're afraid? So I've got a number of steps here, and I really wanted to break down step one onto a separate slide because I think it's the most important step, and it has lots of different elements. So what we're talking about is how to communicate our needs and wants effectively, without shame, without apology, even if we're afraid. So the first step, I think, is to process our feelings about the situation. And I think this is something that we often miss. I know I might have missed this in the past. So we want to notice our feelings about the situation. Say someone disrespects us. We want to process our feelings. We want to process any triggers. And what I mean by triggers is, does that language, does that situation trigger memories from my early life, from my past, because we need to separate the past from the present. The reason I find it so hard to express my truth to an authority figure, for example, a male boss, is that I project my father onto him. And with my dad, I was very interested. For me, the priority was make him stay, make him love me, don't make him angry, avoid rejection, avoid abandonment, avoid all those things. So if I am projecting my dad onto my boss, I'm going to be behaving with my boss as though he was my dad. So I'm going to be trying to avoid rejection, abandonment, anger, all those things. So I need to separate my past from my present. So even though my boss has spoken to me in a way that triggers memories of my dad, I need to realize that he's not my dad. And although the situation triggers painful memories, it's not the same. So we want to separate the past from the present. Because if we don't, we're going to try and respond in the present as a wounded child. So we are going to lash out, we're going to cry, we're going to throw our toys out the pram, we're going to maybe say more than we want to say. It might not be in our best interests. So the question to ask is, what or whom does this situation or person remind me of? So say your partner is disrespecting you or hasn't shown up. Your partner hasn't shown up for a meeting or a date or a dinner, and it totally triggers you. You feel completely abandoned and rejected, and you ring them up and you have a massive argument before finding out the reasonable, rational reasons why they're not there. And that causes even more disturbance. So we want to separate the past from the present. And remember the expression, if it is hysterical, it is historical. So if my reaction to the situation is extreme, it is because my history has been triggered. My past has been triggered. I'll just give you one sort of example from my work life. So years ago, I was freelance journalism, doing freelance journalism, writing for women's magazines. And I needed to ring up. I'd sent a few emails to the editor of Red magazine, but I wanted to work for them, good magazine. And she hadn't replied. So of course, first of all, I make up stories. She hates me. She doesn't like me. I'm rubbish. My story's rubbish. And then I knew that I had to ring her up because that is challenging my codependency. I knew I had to pick up the phone to her and say, hey, I've sent you an article. I was literally shaking. And I'm in this office space and I'm on my knees shaking because I need to ring this woman who somehow I have turned her into authority figure, mother, stepmother, and I'm frightened. I'm frightened of rejection. I'm frightened of abandonment, and I'm shaking. But I do it anyway. I do it anyway because I am committed to healing from this stuff. And she answers the phone and she says, oh, I missed that email. That sounds like a really good story. Yes, we'll take your article and we'll pay you £650 for it. So that's one example of how I projected various parental figures onto a newspaper editor. I've also had conversations with family members on the phone where I've literally been shaking because I've needed to speak my truth and set a boundary, because I am triggered, because I feel like I'm 3 years old, 5 years old, 8 years old, because I feel like my survival depends on it. Do you understand what I'm saying? Do you relate to this? Do you think you are able to separate your past from your present when triggered? What if you haven't landed on what is causing the trigger or the specific memory it reminds you of? Does that matter? I don't think it matters. I think what we want to check in with is is my physiological response warranted by this situation? Is it equal to the situation, or is it exaggerated? Like, are my palms sweaty? Is my heart racing? Because that would suggest that you're not in your adult space having an adult conversation. It would suggest that you're suffering from deep fear of rejection, abandonment, anger, and they come from your childhood. So even if you can't find the memory, I try and be present to the feelings and just think, gosh, something else is going on here. Something else is going on here. I don't know what it is, but it's something else. And then I would take some time. I would take some time to pause, to breathe, to reflect, to talk to someone. I'll be talking about this in a moment. So you don't have to do it immediately. Just allow yourself some processing time. So what about speaking your truth with a family member through a letter because of fear of their response? Yeah, that is one option. Yeah, that gives it time to land. It gives the other person time to process. It helps you to manage your fear and your feelings. I'd say there are pros to that. I'd say there might be some cons to that. You don't get to read the body language, but it's about what you're capable of doing. If that is what you can manage without causing yourself harm, then that is the right path. But let me talk about some other let me talk about how you can get support with this, and that might help as well. So step one, process. You know, what does this remind me of anything? Am I triggered? How do I feel? Step two, again, we often miss this. Evaluate. Is this in my best interests? So when I first recovered from codependency, I thought that healing meant that I should go around and express my truth to absolutely everybody. That isn't always in my best interests. And I think real recovery is when we think, okay, I could speak my truth here. I could stand up for myself here, but it's not in my best interest. So evaluate is an important part of the process. I'll finish this and then I'll come to that question. Plan and prepare. So when we need to have a difficult conversation, it's really helpful to write down what we want to say, to prepare what we want to say, to practice it in front of the mirror, to practice it with other people. And we want to think about how we say it. So using I statements, I feel undervalued, or I feel disrespected, or I feel ignored, or I feel hurt, or I feel upset. They are our feelings. Nobody can argue with our feelings. So it's best to start with I statements and I feel, having first done the processing so that our feelings are present feelings and don't carry huge weight from the past. They will carry some weight from the past. Some of our past baggage will be there, but we want to try and separate so that we show up as an adult and speak as an adult. I find this very hard myself, which is why, I had a difficult conversation recently with someone, and I managed to have the conversation and I managed to sound like I had it together. On the inside, I was absolutely terrified. My heart was racing, my palms were sweaty because my memory was like, because I'm thinking danger, danger. So it is hard to completely separate the past from the present. But planning and preparation will help. Practice getting support. So bookending is where we speak to someone before we do something and speak to somebody afterwards. So I might need to have a difficult conversation with a friend. I will ring up another friend first and I'll say, and we want to choose people who are, emotionally intelligent. I'll say, I feel scared. I need to have this conversation with this boyfriend or this date. I'm just going to leave it here with you. I'm just going to tell you that I'm going to do it. And then we've done it and we feel a little shaken up and we bookend. So we call them again or text them and we say, I've just done that. I feel scared, but I feel anxious, but I've done it. We reparent ourselves by building ourselves up, meeting our own needs, talking to the child who is frightened, managing any shame and guilt. You deserve to have your needs and wants. Self-care isn't selfish. So we prepare ourselves. So we prepare ourselves as best as we can so that we can show up as the adult. And then we manage, and then we speak our truth. Then we speak our truth. Once we've done all these steps, we speak our truth. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but this is a guideline that I find helpful. And then we practice aftercare, which I'll talk about in a moment. I'll just look at this question. Do you think we are afraid to speak up to family or dates or whoever? Because if they get the huff with us speaking up, we then have to sit with the fallout and believe we have caused that until they come round. And also we cannot cope with the feelings the fallout generates. Yeah. Yeah. So the thing is, if we speak up to a date and it causes a huge stink and the date doesn't want to see us again, that's going to hurt. But if we have followed our intuition and been honest, then we have done the right thing. And it's good that that person doesn't want to be with us anymore. Even though it hurts, we'll get over it. Someone who is meant to be with us will stay and we'll negotiate and we'll talk and we'll work through it. In your question there is a little bit of taking on other people's feelings. So obviously, if someone is upset by what we've said, we're going to feel that. But if we have practiced integrity and honesty and processed our feelings first, step one, then we're just speaking our truth. And then we have to try and hold our boundaries. And your last point, we can't cope with the feelings a fallout generates, is the aftercare. So this is what I call the afterburn. So it hurts. So when we set a boundary with someone and we see they're upset or a date says they don't want to be with us anymore, we feel the burn. We feel the burn, and I've felt this a lot. And what do we want to do? We want to instantly take it back. Oh, I didn't mean to say that. Oh, I'm really sorry. Or, oh, it doesn't matter. Like, no, my needs don't matter. And we want to undo what we've done. And for me, when people told me about the afterburn, it was just really helpful to know that this is a normal part of the process. It's not that I've said something wrong or done something wrong. It's not that I've caused huge amounts of hurt. It's just a natural part of the process. I'm gonna hurt. I'm gonna burn afterwards. And we want to sit with it, sit with the feelings, write down the feelings so that we process them, reach out for support. So I'm in the afterburn, ring someone up. Or if you're in one of my groups, if you're on my group course, I'm in the afterburn, I need help. Or if you're being coached by me, email me, ring a friend. Resist the temptation to undo what you've done or to take back what you've said. Literally sit on your hands, zip up your mouth, and stay with it. Stay with it for 24 hours. Stay with it for as long as you can. Yeah, and it gets easier the more you do it. So remember the afterburn. I think I asked what the other person thinks about something I want, to test out their body language and opinion to see if it's safe. rather than clearly saying, I want, and why it's important. Yeah. So great awareness. And we want to try and like tweak that step by step, like step back a little bit, don't do that so much. And it's just about challenging this little by little, challenging it. You know, that muscle that you're building up in the gym, you're exercising a muscle that was underused, that perhaps is dormant, that went to sleep. And it's about building it up again. And the more you do it, the stronger that muscle gets. And on the other side of the coin, if you are someone who does the controlling behaviors in terms of judging people, criticizing people, being intolerant, being disrespectful, undermining others, you want to step back from that. Now, I've included this picture because my marriage wouldn't have happened if I didn't know about these behaviors, if I didn't know that I was judgmental, critical, intolerant, sometimes disrespectful and undermining of my husband, because it is how I keep myself safe from intimacy. So I can both people please and be the doormat, and I can control and criticize and judge. And I also include it because we're kind of, even though we're together, we're kind of separate in it. So criticism, judgment, all that creates distance. So when you go dating, and if you come away with like 20 reasons why this person isn't right for you, just have a think about whether you are trying to keep yourself safe. Is this a codependent behavior? Is this part of my fear of intimacy? So there's a good point here about, I don't think I can sit with the feelings. I think I need to physically move the feelings through shaking, dancing, swimming. Absolutely. Thank you for pointing that out. And I do the same. I did some angry swimming the other day in response to some feelings. So absolutely, shake them out, shout them out, roar, get in your car, drive to a field, scream, punch a pillow, all those things to get them out. And then remind yourself that you're honoring yourself and your needs. Yeah. Obviously, all these behaviors are easier if we are feeling strong in ourselves, resilient. And you might have seen these pictures before. We have the diminished, depleted tree, not nourished, not nurtured, no roots. And we have the strong tree, the strong trunk, the well-nourished, well-nurtured, well-rooted, well-connected, well-supported. So even though you've heard this a million times, I'd love you to be aware that standing up for ourselves is really hard if we're knackered, if we're exhausted, if we haven't eaten well, if we're not meeting our needs, if we feel resentful because we haven't had any play. It's really hard. It's kind of the last thing that we're going to do. So we really want to work on these self-care basics. Nervous system regulation. So when I talk about sweaty palms, heart beating extra fast, high anxiety, this is my nervous system, completely dysregulated. So these are ways in which we can regulate our nervous system. So we want to do this when we're triggered. We want to do this when we're preparing to speak our truth. And we want to do this all the time because we're filling up the tank. We're filling up our resources. We are, just daily strengthening ourselves and calming ourselves. So breath, meditation, exercise, creativity, play, connection, laughter. Ask yourself if you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. It's going to be so hard to stand up for yourself if you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. Getting your sleep. This is how to regulate your nervous system. And then on a deeper level, we need to meet our own unmet needs. We need to meet all our needs, but absolutely we need to meet the needs that weren't met in childhood, because otherwise we're going to try and get people to meet them for us by being codependent. So we identify our unmet needs and wants. We do our best to meet them ourselves. We grieve the losses from our past. So we really do have to grieve the losses that we didn't get what we needed, that our father left or died, or our mother left or died, or wasn't there for us, or was emotionally disconnected, or was drinking, or we really do have to grieve all those losses, because otherwise we'll look for those people in other people, and we'll look to partners and bosses and friends to meet our needs. And we want to ask for support from healthy sources. So that's emotionally intelligent people, that's people like me, coaches, counselors, therapists. If you're in one of my group courses, we want to be supported, because this isn't easy work, and I could spend a whole session on this. I do actually have a workshop coming up which is similar. And we want to transform our faulty core beliefs. So this is some work that you can do. You might want to identify now one of your faulty core beliefs. You might want to write it in the chat. For example, one of mine is, if I speak my truth, something bad will happen. And if we follow that through to where I was at the beginning of this session, I won't survive. So if I speak my truth, something bad will happen and I won't survive. So of course I'm terrified of speaking my truth. If I show up as my authentic self, I'll be rejected and I won't survive. So these are my core beliefs. Do you relate to those? Do you have your own? And we want to transform them into healthy core beliefs. It is safe to speak my truth. I am acceptable and lovable. I am enough. My authentic self is welcome here. So we could use these as affirmations, but with affirmation, we need to follow up with action. We can't just go around saying it. Saying it helps, but we also need to follow up with action. Other people's needs are more important. I don't matter. Thank you for that. That I don't matter is really important, because it shows up all the time in my coaching. I don't matter. So we want to change that to I matter. And then we want to act as if we really believe that. Yeah. How do you act as if you really believe that you matter? That is so important. I'm not as good as others. I think I'll lose my friends if I challenge things they say. So I haven't talked about this directly, but it might happen. I mean, that might not happen. That might be a faulty core belief, that I'll lose my friends if I challenge things they say. That might be rooted in early life experiences. And on my journey, my relationships have changed. When I said no to something because I needed to honor myself, the other person didn't like it, and that relationship didn't last. Now, hopefully that's not the case here, but the relationships that stay are the ones that are meant to stay. They're the ones that they're the people who honor us, who respect us, who appreciate us, with whom we can show up authentically. So when we are challenging codependency, we are often breaking generational patterns. This is a photo of me and my mum. My mum's no longer alive. My mum was codependent. She probably inherited that. I inherited it too. And I am so proud that I am breaking that pattern, that I have had the opportunity to break that pattern. And I'm sad that she didn't have the opportunity. So I do it for me, but I also do it to honor those who went before, who weren't able to, didn't have the strength to, or didn't have the same opportunities that I have had, therapy, etc. So we are breaking generational patterns, and it's so important, so important. And we're also thinking about our future selves. So we're not only honoring the generations before us, but we're thinking about our future self. So if you think of yourself at the age of this beautiful lady here, if you're in her position at her age and you look back on your life, how would you have told yourself to act, to speak? What would you have advised yourself to say and so forth? So what would I do if I wasn't afraid? What would I say if I wasn't afraid? How can I build a life that I will be proud of in 10, 20, 30 years? Think about these questions, because I am going to ask you to answer them. I'll come back to them in a moment, just as we wrap up. So healthy relationships are about co-creation. We co-create a healthy relationship with other people. So we have interdependent relationships that balance our needs and wants. We have mutual compromise. Compromise is part of a relationship, but it has to be mutual, not just one party compromising. We negotiate healthy boundaries. Might take some give and take, might be a bit messy. We might need to get into the muddle. We might need to have awkward conversations. But if the person is meant to be in our lives, they will stay. You know, first of all, we do all of our processing so that we don't drop a bombshell that's loaded with stuff from our past. And we do all of this imperfectly, because another aspect of codependency is that we feel like we need to be absolutely perfect, otherwise we won't survive. And what is so important to know is, when we have an opportunity to challenge our codependency, it is a golden opportunity for healing and for growth. And although it's terrifying, it is not to be missed, because without it, we won't grow and we won't heal. It is a golden opportunity. So this is just something you might want to think about. What would I do if I really felt enough? What would I say? What conversations would I have? What might be your next steps? This is such an eye-opener. I'm just looking at the chat. This is such an eye-opener, as I now realize that my undermining colleague may also be codependent. Do you have any advice on how to deal with codependency in others? So yeah, the first thing is to realize, because I had this breakthrough with someone I know, it is to realize that one aspect of codependency is that people put other people at dis-ease. I have someone in my life who puts me at dis-ease. And it's only when I really saw that as a codependent trait was I able to manage myself around her. So she has a codependent trait, so do I, but she has a codependent trait. She puts me at dis-ease. That is born out of her dysfunctional childhood and her codependency. I can have compassion for that. The more compassion I have for her, the less triggered I am. I think she's codependent. She's putting me at dis-ease. She needs to do this to feel okay in the world. She needs to do this to feel safe. So I don't feel so triggered. I don't feel so frightened. I recover my adult quicker. So that awareness is really important. And then it's about taking care of yourself in the situation. Like, do you need to remove yourself from the situation? If you can, do you need to set some boundaries? They will be easier to set if you are in your adult and you're aware that she is in her codependent. It's very difficult to tell a codependent person that they're being codependent, by the way. So we have to realize this for ourselves. But just, you know, see her as someone who is suffering, someone who is struggling, and someone who is living out her survival mechanisms, and she's trying to stay safe. Your job is to hold your space, hold your boundary, tell yourself that you are safe, and take care of yourself in that relationship. interact with her in a way that, you know, as an adult, speak your truth to her. You could say, I feel, you could use the I feel statements, but I think it will help if you're aware that she is being codependent. I hope that will help. Perfectionism is another aspect of codependency because it's a form of control. So if I can control how you see me by being perfect, then maybe I will be safe. And then that shows up in my work, it shows up in how I look, it shows up. So it's a form of control so that I can stay safe. So yeah, generational aspect. Perhaps in the past, codependency was how women survived and felt they need this approach to survive. That rings true. You know, in the past, women were in subordinated roles at home, in the workplace. Yeah, and there were also strong women who challenged that. Thank goodness for them. I fear I would be too vulnerable if I'm honest, that I couldn't defend myself from verbal attack because I react to process so slowly. Yeah, I relate to that. I relate to reacting or processing things slowly and needing time. It's about finding a way to do it that works for you. Somebody mentioned writing a letter earlier, but whatever works for you so that you can create the space that you need to speak. I mean, over time, we learn some really useful expressions, such as, I need to take some time out from this conversation. I feel triggered. I'm feeling really vulnerable right now. Can we come back to this? And then it sounds like the inner child really needs lots of love and reassurance and care, and she needs to feel that she is safe. So lots of self-parenting. So, do you think there is an element of letting go of or changing how we perceive ourselves in order to grow? I sometimes worry I spend my time on materials, resources about personal development, but I'm getting the balance right, spending too much time on this. Yeah, we can spend too much time studying how to be, how we think we ought to be. I think practicing being is really important. So it sounds like you're aware that the balance might be a little bit out of kilter. So changing how we perceive ourselves in order to grow. Yeah, it's about setting ourselves free in a way. It's good to learn and grow and heal, but you are also enough. You are also enough. How do I go from believing I'm codependent to believing I'm an emotionally unhealthy adult that can meet my needs? You know, I recognize that I will always have a tendency towards codependency. I have many, many years of behaving like that, and it takes time to change. So I am a codependent on a recovery journey. I am a codependent on a healing journey. I have many, many occasions when I'm emotionally healthy and well. Sometimes I slip into codependency. I recover very quickly. I get help. I get support. I reach out. I have my networks, etc. So, and we are imperfect. It's about doing it imperfectly. And I think we need to lower our standards for ourselves so we don't have to get it right all the time. Like, oh, I subordinated my needs over there, or I didn't speak up for myself in that relationship. Okay, can I correct that? Can I go back tomorrow and correct that? Or has that ship sailed and I just need to learn from that and do it differently next time? Yeah, it doesn't have to be perfect. But you are an emotionally healthy adult a lot of the time, and you are meeting your needs. So think about these questions. What would I do if I really felt enough? I have a Heal Your Inner Child workshop. It was advertised on April the 29th, which is a Monday. A corporate talk I'm delivering has clashed with that. So I'm probably moving it to the 30th, but I'll be in touch about that. That's the Tuesday. Only a few people have signed up for that so far. So hopefully that doesn't mess with people's schedules too much. And very briefly, my How to Fall in Love group program will cocoon you in a group of women who are on a healing journey. And our doors reopen in May. You can either join with Date with Courage, Clarity and Confidence, that's the dating stage, or you can join and go through the laying the foundations. And if you've been part of these courses before, you are still welcome to join, reach out to me, and I can tell you about that. Yeah, we're stronger together in community, feeling connected, feeling resourced, having people to bounce these things off. I haven't done any of these healing things on my own. Difficult conversations, I always check them out with other people. I ask for support, I have therapy, I have coaching, etc. So yeah, we're stronger together. So we're now on to questions, which I've already answered, and we're also kind of almost, well, we're sort of at time. So if you have to go at 6:30, please do. I'll switch the recording off in a moment. Also with relationships, we may attract people who are also codependent, but the new approach, we are more likely to find someone who is not codependent. Yeah, absolutely. So if we are sort of really in our codependent relationships, if we're being subordinate, people-pleasing, doormat, we will probably attract someone who is the controller, manipulator. So they see a chance to manipulate a vulnerable person, a people pleaser, and then we are vulnerable to their control and manipulation. If we are a controlling person, and manipulating person, if we're on that side of the coin, and we probably have both sides of the coin within us, then we might seek somebody out who's kind of weak in our eyes, or isn't very strong, or doesn't have good boundaries, because then we can control them. So the more emotionally healthy we are, the more well we are, the more we will be drawn to emotionally well people who aren't codependent, or who at least are on a journey of healing. Great. So we have a success story. I've attracted someone who's done both my courses, may I add. I've attracted an incredibly independent person, and I too am independent, and both of us are emotionally healthy. Such a change from my past relationships. That's brilliant and inspiring, and thank you for sharing. So if you have any questions, any burning questions that you need me to answer on the recording, pop them there. Otherwise, I'm going to stop my share. Thanks, everyone. And I'll say goodbye to those who are watching on recording. You know where to find me if you'd like support and like to join one of my group programs and take a look at the workshop that's coming up. And there will be more workshops. This is clearly a topic that I could obviously go on for 6 hours, so it might be worth doing another one on this. Okay, stop the recording.